Good day and welcome back to Below the Curve Gaming. So today we've got something slightly different for you, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of an overview and review of the Kaldstrom Colonial Settlement Pack and the Kaldstrom Scenery Expansion Pack, which is what Ben and I used to start our Infinity gaming and what we've been using in most of the battle reports that you've been watching so far. So we're going to talk through it. We're going to talk through the sort of building and buying's pros and cons, how we see that. And then we're going to talk through the sort of gaming and the immersion side of things and the pros and cons we see in there. And then we're going to do a sort of conclusion. We're going to rate it under 5 columns and then give you an average score, which will give it a sort of a mark out of 5. So the first question is, how much does it cost to buy this stuff? So there's two ways. You could have bought the Kaldstrom starter set and Beyond Kaldstrom, which would have given you some in the scenery. But what we did was we went out and we just bought the scenery packs. So the Kaldstrom Colonial Settlement Pack is £26.50 at retail value in the UK. Now you can get it with discount from various stores. It comes with 4 buildings, 2 larger buildings, a sort of medium-sized building, and then a small building. We'll talk about a small building a wee bit later on because it has a unique function. It also comes with a gaming mat which can be used for Code 1. Now it's worth just mentioning that we are using all of ours for N4, and that will somewhat skew what we're saying and the relevance of some of the pieces. It comes with a bit of scatter terrain as well, and it also comes with some tokens. It works out at £6.63 on average per building, which is not bad. And the Kaldstrom Scenery Expansion Pack is £25.50. It is also 4 buildings. It's the ITS Objective Room, it's a tower, and then it's 2 of the sort of small medium-sized buildings. So it works out at £6.38 per building. It also comes with a mat which has got a sort of slightly different layout on it, just so you've got something a bit different. The mat that our stuff is on that you can see in the video is not either of these mats. It's a mat from TT Combat, but we're going to discuss that in a later video, so we won't dwell on it here. So we're going to go over to Ben now, who's going to talk through some of the pros of the building and buying of these sets.
So firstly, the terrain is readily available. It's relatively cheap, as Martin's discussed, and you can get it in a variety of ways, which is quite useful, particularly if you've bought the Kaldstrom box, you've already got a starter through there. It's quick to build. We estimated roughly that it took an hour to 2 hours per box to build it. And roughly that works out about 20 minutes or so per building. Some of the scatter terrain is really quite quick. It's a couple of minutes just to pop it out of the cardboard sheets that it comes on and then put in the feet. And it goes together relatively easily. The terrain comes pre-painted or pre-coloured in this case. And the buildings are all double-sided, so you can build them in 2 different ways, which particularly if you end up buying 2 of the sets, which we did, it does give you a variety, so none of the buildings have to look the same, which is key for a bit of immersion in the gaming environment. It is easy to build with instructions. I would always follow the instructions for it because there's quite a lot of similar looking pieces, and it is key that you don't try and force any of the bits into any of the other or into anywhere that they're not meant to go, because we'll talk about this later, it can cause a bit of damage. Thankfully it's all clearly labelled, so with the instructions and the notations on the cardboard you are able to work out which bit goes where. It comes with a mat included, which is 24 by 32 inch, which is one of the Code 1 sizes, and it's like a double-sided photo paper. Seems quite durable, but we haven't used it as we've discussed. They are also compatible with other sets. So this is a Kaldstrom set. There are 2 other sets. There's the one from Crimson Stone that's just new out, and there's the other one from, I believe, Operation Wildfire is where it came out. Tokens are included. These are all double-sided tokens, predominantly yet again for Code 1, however also compatible in N4. And one of the big bonuses with it is it stores inside itself. So all the buildings you can flip upside down, and the smaller buildings will fit in an almost Russian doll-esque inside each other, which keeps everything nice and compact for storage. And the other final bonus we feel is there's no glue required. It all goes together just by pushing into place.
Now, there are some downsides to this. Firstly, as we said, the terrain is cardboard, and whilst it holds colour well and it's fairly durable, if you spill any water on it, if your house is damp, if you're a smoker, and if you have pets, the terrain will start to absorb those smells, potential dampness. It will damage over time. And if you get water on it, that's it. It's going to have stains on it from there on. Also, if a model falls against it and chips it, or if when you're popping a piece out and it tears, there's very little you can really do about that. Now, I think we'll have a photo or 2 at some point through this, just showing and iterating some of the points. And this has happened to a couple of our pieces. There's some very obvious joins. Now you can see where the ricotta is at the front of your screen, pluckily facing down the prime of the Pannoceana, that the security barrier, the legs that hold it up, it's bare cardboard, because obviously it's the compressed cardboard and you can't paint over that. If you try and put paint in, you're adding moisture to bare cardboard, which will sort of fan it out. So there's nothing you can do about that very visible bare cardboard. You need to be careful with that and just accept it's going to be there. And the thing is, with these obvious joins, what will happen is that some facings of a building will have very few and other facings will have an awful lot. They are very tight squeezes when you're assembling them. There's very low tolerances for building. And we've got quite a few, I would say, cracking photos. I think heartbreaking is what we're going for, particularly with some of the bridges and staircases when they try and push on. The cuts are very, very snug, and particularly at the bottom of some of these, like where there's these joins that take a lot of pressure, we've found that things start to splay, they start to sort of fray, and sometimes when you're pushing down, if you apply a bit too much pressure, that's it. It goes. And coming from this, there's a couple of pieces, and the tower is a really noticeable one that doesn't quite fit together properly. The bits just don't quite line up, which results in things being at ever so slight angles. It puts a lot of stress on the cardboard itself, which is really disappointing in a way, because you assume these things are tested, and these are things that can go together like in 2 facings, so you'd assume that all these things be factored in, but they're not. And at the top of some of the stairs, the joins aren't quite right and sort of bend corners as well. Like I was saying, it's prone to fraying, particularly at the very bottom of stairs. I think it's probably better iterated with a photograph rather than trying to explain it, but the colour layer can peel away, leaving just sort of a fan of grey-brown cardboard, which is not what you're looking for. There is a limited selection as well. Now, if you include the Kaldstrom stuff with the Crimson Stone, it's going to look incredibly different, despite the fact that buildings are exactly the same physically if you peeled off the colour. The buildings, as Ben was saying, are double-sided, but a lot of them, one side is a hospital and the other side is an equally unique building that you're not going to have 2 of. And so if you end up with, for some reason, heaven forbid, 3 sets of the same, your board is going to look a bit odd. The hollow boards, now you can see there's one here just at the right of your screen. Thank you, Ben. Don't it's not that necessarily they don't go together correctly, but they are printed on the red cardboard and the blue cardboard. And so some of the sheets are in red, some are in blue. For some reason, hollow boards are red on both sides or blue on both sides, which looks really, really strange when you then try and put a hollow board that has the two blue legs and it's got a blue facing, and then you stick on this red one and it looks completely wrong. The shade, red and blue aren't colours that intrinsically go together particularly well. And the shade of the red is quite violently clashing with the blue. And so we found that when we put it together, it looked really wrong. The blue legs sticking out at the bottom of the red bit didn't look right, which meant we were forced to take very drastic action in that we had to trim off some of the tops of the blue stuff to get blue hollow boards. And then when we tried putting the red ones together, we realised that all the red ones are indented to allow them to line up with the blue ones, so actually they don't stay together and they keep falling apart. The contrast on the colour, now as Ben said, they're pre-coloured. The contrast is a bit odd. The buildings are very, very dark, which from our point of view of videoing makes it look like you're always fighting at night. The camera doesn't pick the colour up as well. But Infinity is a game of bright neon. It's a game of vivid colours. The buildings are a bit muted. Now this means that they don't take away from your beautifully painted models charging across the tabletop. But a table can start to look very, very dark. Particularly if you look at our tower, which you can see at the right hand of your building, as the colour goes up, it gets darker and darker and darker. Now we're shining a spotlight onto the board to try and pick up some of the colour, but a lot of these buildings have lots of very, very small print on them, which just gets lost in this. And our final point is that they're a bit generic. And part of this is from, and we're going to discuss this later in the immersion thing as well, but it's to do with the footprint, it's to do with storage, but it does mean that when you put them all down, they just look a bit samey. And in order to break it up, you maybe need to build the St. Lazarus Infirmary or the helipad, but then the problem is you're not going to have two hospital buildings side by side. You've got the shopping mall, which is about the same size as a postage stamp, which I imagine that having more than 3 female fusiliers in would cause a fight. But some of the buildings are very, very small for what they're labelled to be. And the field hospital looks like it could hold about 6 patients. Now, I know Infinity is a game of squad-based combat, but I have managed to religiously lose 14 troops on more than one occasion. I'm a bit worried as to where they'd get resurrected from. With all that being said, we're going to move on to the gaming and immersion side of things. And you're stuck with me because I'm going to rattle through the pros for you. So, firstly, they are consistent with the Infinity lore. They reference companies like Minecore that are very, very important to the Infinity story. There are these hollow boards that we see in a lot of the artwork, particularly the ones where you've got civilians sort of traipsing around and dancing while some Aquila guard or Swiss guard strides through arresting some miscreant. They have that look that they have come from the Infinity rulebooks. They are in the same colours as the factions. This does, however, mean the Nomad ones are in dark red and black. As I said earlier, there is that sort of off colour tone, but they do look like they belong in an Infinity table. We do see from some other companies, particularly when they do their sort of futuristic sci-fi, some of the Asian-looking buildings, it looks just like it's generic cyberpunk. These scream Infinity. They are completely scale accurate. Now you can see with our models here, the Hospitaller Knight and the staircase fits very neatly on. My Fusilier has sort of thigh-high cover, which the rulebook states is about the height you should have to be claiming cover. Ben's Racotte has the same. The ITS room is taller than my tag. The buildings are a little bit taller than the tag, which is really good because they break up the line of sight. But they're also not in a way that some of the early scenery was for Infinity. And this maybe came from the early Infinity models being a lot of the times hunched over and quite rounded. Scales were off quite a bit. When MDF terrain first came out, it was really popular for Malifaux. weird, about 6 months later, redid their entire range, and suddenly every Malifaux character had the limbo if they wanted to get into a house and suck in their shoulders. Apparently that's really difficult to do because the doorways were all far too small. They were variable height, which is also really good. And I did promise I'd come back to the small buildings. The small buildings can stack on top of the largest buildings, so you can actually create an extra layer height as well. Infinity, if you're higher up than your opponents, you gain cover. And being able to actually set your buildings up to have it over 3 or 4 or even 5 levels almost is really important. And these scenery packs, just out the box, would allow you to do a table that's actually in 3 tiers, if not 4, depending on how you set them up. They come with blocking terrain and they come with cover. So if you see the hollow board on the right hand side, that is blocking terrain. It's total cover for any Silhouette 2 model. The sort of riot barriers, I think that's actually a snowmobile parking one, but they are cover. As I said earlier, they're of the appropriate height. And there's also sort of hollow boards that you could play count as saturation. You could play them count as mimetism for folk behind them if you didn't want them to be absolutely bulletproof, because they're really meant to be a holographic news display. You could use them as something like that if you were so inclined. And something that I feel is important to mention is that the ITS compatible room, the objective room that you can just see at the left of the screen, it comes with the consoles, it comes with objective tokens that are the correct size for your games. The doors are removable, so if you're playing the game where you can access it with anybody and you don't need to break the doors down, you can take the doors out and then you can use them as barriers. If you need the doors to be in, you can just sit them in. And then obviously you need the hacker or the D charges to break in. So it comes with those options. It comes with a roof if you decide you're not using it as the ITS room and you're just using it as a large piece of terrain. It comes with a walkway on the inside. So if you get in first, you can place yourself in an advantageous position. If you're using Combined Army, you can go for those horrifying words. My Noctis reveals himself in the most terrifying position that he could be in. But this is really important because ITS rooms are expensive and you're effectively getting one for £6.38 with this set. In fact, your set is cheaper than most ITS rooms are, and it's pre-coloured. ITS rooms are big. There's a lot of work goes into painting up an ITS room. So it's a real bonus if you buy this set.
Now, moving on to some of the more negative aspects of it in relation to the gaming and immersion side. Firstly, there's no real cohesive story to the buildings we've got. Although they are all from Kaldstrom, or that's the intention with them, you've got a couple of named buildings. There's a wide variety of buildings that don't have a feel of a street scene or a compound or some sort of kind of mining establishment. You've got a hospital, you've got a shopping mall, you've got the mining office. There's then regional offices for Minecore as well. So you've got 2 different sizes of them. That's probably the closest you come to having similar stuff. But then you've got a kind of helipad, a power plant. It's a bit scattergun approach to what the actual buildings could or should be. So they lack the cohesion that you would be able to get if you ordered from other ranges. Likes of Warsenal do the Comanche set for like a forward outpost or base. Antonicitis do a forward base as well, or they do the kind of streets undertown scene. Various different options out there that allow you to fashion something that's unique to the experience you're wanting your games to portray. This doesn't quite give you that. One of the aspects that impacts on the gaming side of things is the stairs and the walkways are all narrow. They fit a 25mm base up without any problems. However, if you've got a larger based model, for instance the Seraph on display or a remote on a 40mm base, you're quite limited as to what you can do because you need to end your movement on a full placement of the base. So you need to either be able to make it all the way across the walkway or bridge or up the stairs to one of the central kind of platforms at a time. It also means that you can't stand a 40mm based model in one of the stairwells to be able to kind of have that advantageous shooting position. Now, with a lot of the action packs for Code 1 or faction packs in general, you always get a big guy, as it were, likes of the Diokai for the JSA, the Gamma for the O12, that has that 40mm base. And it can be quite a limitation for how you're playing your games with the fact that you can't place them in these advantageous positions. With the packs, everything has a square footprint, which means that everything's quite regimented. It's got a certain aesthetic to it. However, it does mean that for actually setting up your table, you're going to end up with very similar ways of the board looking, of kind of alleyways that will naturally be formed by the placement of the buildings. And either you're going to have to place everything in kind of almost a grid, horizontal and vertical, with the edges of the square matching the edges of your board, or you skew everything and have it almost isometrically aligned. But long and the short of it, you're always going to have very set kind of fire lanes and ways that buildings interact with each other. It's lacking the versatility of some more unusual shaped buildings, rectangles, L-shaped buildings, circular buildings with that add a bit more to the gaming experience. Everything in this does feel very much like it's set to almost go within itself for that kind of storage purposes, which is great, but it is a limitation for the gaming side. As we'd mentioned in the kind of build section, there is a generic aspect to the terrain that does have its limitations for gameplay as well. Because we've bought 2 of each set, it has almost accentuated this problem that you can end up with very mirrored deployments and boards kind of set up in general, that if you've got 2 of the expansion sets, you're going to end up with 2 towers. And either you have one amazing deployment zone with 2 towers in it, or you place them in no man's land, or you have one in a deployment zone and one in no man's land. And it can often end up with quite similar ways of games playing out, that people want to have a tower for their sniping. This is maybe something that was more prevalent in N3 with the power of sniper rifles at that point. However, the deployment choice can often be made for you almost by the fact that the set has these certain buildings in it. There's also, in some ways, a lack of table cover. Although our set, or combined sets of 2 of the Colonial set and 2 of the expansion set, do cover the majority of the 4x4 board, it does mean that you often don't have anything to really break up deployment zones for when you've got parachutist deployment zone models coming on from the back. I'm very fond of Margot and Duroc from Equip Mirage. Martin maybe not so much. But there can be a problem that either you have to set up stuff in the deployment zone to kind of almost limit the benefit of those, or you end up almost with a kind of square around the table of limited cover, that then with all the buildings placed inside that almost is, I'm maybe not explaining it particularly well, but it kind of shows up often in the battle reports we've had, that there is almost this kind of border to the board. Because the way that the buildings are shaped, you don't generally want them being on the edge of the terrain, and you're probably not going to be able to have them overlapping the edge of the table either. Partly it could be somewhat limited by if you played on a 6x4 board and then designated where the gaming area is, you might be able to break some of that up, but it's a wee bit more difficult to do out the box. So the final kind of negative I see with the terrain packs is a gaming style called castling. All of these pieces of terrain have what are effectively ramparts round the tops of the buildings. There's no flat-topped buildings. Everything's got partial cover working its way around it, which is quite good from a beginner's point of view, as it gives you that security that you can move your model into the edge of the building, have a commanding view, and also have a bit of protection. However, this becomes more of an issue the longer you're playing, as it becomes more of a safety blanket that can be quite difficult to break the habit of really wanting to keep your models in this defensive position. It can lead to a more cautious gameplay style that can limit your development as a player. The issue with some of this, particularly with the towers and then these kind of castles almost in each of the buildings, is it can force you to almost see Infinity as a game of killing your opponent's models, staying in cover or a defensible position, and willing your opponent to try and come to you with particularly HMGs and other big kind of long-range guns. So creating these killing zones, but not really thinking of the scenario or the classified objectives that really Infinity is built on. And it limits the extent of the game. There's ITS packs have 20 different missions, but if you treat each of them as an opportunity for annihilation, you're not necessarily getting as much out of A, the game rules, or B, your model range, because some of the models aren't suited to that gaming style. You've got more niche uses, particularly of specialists that don't see full fruition through a castling style.
I think we have seen this in some of our games, particularly the ones with the GSA, where I've been very guilty of investing in a 5-strong fire team with a big gun, and this usually a missile launcher, where I'm going to get the ballistic skill bonus to make my Kaisotsus about as useful as a Fusilier, and a burst bonus. And then what I've done is I've found the biggest building I can, placed the Kaisotsu team in it, and they've never moved. They've sat there as an ARO piece and just denied Ben the chance to play the game, which, whilst it's a valid tactic, we have then seen other games, maybe not ones on camera that you guys have seen, but where I've then had to try and actually move my Kaisotsu. I had an awful game against Stephen where I lost 1-0, and I lost because my Kaisotsus had to make a run, heaven forbid, a double move at one point, but I was so not used to using them in this manner. The whole team was gunned down one after another by his Hack-Toe, I believe it was, but I had got very used to, this is my defensive piece, this will safely hold my board or my side of the table and deny him the chance to play the game. And because I'd got very used to look for cover, be in cover, sit in my grid, I had actually stopped thinking about what GSA are meant to do. And what GSA are meant to do is advance across the table in a very, very aggressive manner. And I'd started playing GSA as though they were Pan-Oceania, and more so as though they were the Neo-Terra Capitoline Army, which was the army I used in N3, because I'd become too used to this cautious defensive game style, which our scenery collection had dictated I should be playing. And one of the issues, as Ben very correctly identified, with all the buildings having this parapet, is that we never use anything prone, but unless it's crossing a walkway. Ben will talk about walkways in a second, because being prone is actually a massive disadvantage. If usually at the top of your screen, if she was prone, would have absolutely no line of sight. And one of you guys commented on an earlier video where Ben shockingly cheated because in the air roll phase he stood up to shoot. Now you can't stand up as a reaction. You certainly can't stand up to shoot, to be more precise. And being prone is a real disadvantage because all of a sudden you've no line of fire. Unless you're a hacker, and if you can't see and the opponents have stealth, you're actually doing yourself a massive disadvantage by lying down. Stephen did this against me, where he tried to hack down my Teutonic Knight team until I pointed out he didn't have Sixth Sense and I had stealth. And whilst yes, I was in his zone of control, he didn't know I was there. But the point is, this set of terrain doesn't benefit the use of the prone state. And the prone state is a very, very powerful state.
So with the walkways and the stairs, they also kind of fit into this game style that everything's got a lip around it. Now, partly this goes back to the building of them. It's needed to be able to put them together and to stay together in a durable way. However, it does mean that every part of your terrain does almost force you into this kind of need to stay in cover. It limits the need for smoke and other kind of ways of getting around the need to break cover in the game. And unfortunately, it's something the more games we've played, the more evident it's became. And in some ways, it's one of those kind of circular things that you try and break the kind of gaming style. However, by doing it, if you're not used to taking the models that you need to kind of change that style, then you can find yourself reverting back to it as a kind of safety aspect of it, and an attempt not to lose as many models or that from making rash charges across no man's land. With it is something that I don't think it's a bad way of playing in moderation, and I wouldn't have a go at anybody for doing so. However, from our personal enjoyment out of our games, it's something we're both quite aware of, and something the two of us have had to have discussions about to try and then change how we're doing it, and also to pick up terrain that will enable this or almost force this to be the case.
It's something that I think you have to agree with your regular opponent, because if you're making a conscious effort to change how you play and you're wanting to change your gaming board, but your opponent is dead set that this is how he plays and this is the models he has and this has worked for him, so why would he change? Then you'll find yourself reverting back to it, because charging headlong across the table, waving a sword in a game of guns against an opponent who has no intention of stepping forward, because he has no real need to, is only going to result in you digging out your HMGs for the next game and just going back to squinting through the smoke at each other and chucking individual dice. And we have had games where a turn has literally taken about 2 minutes for turn 2, because we've had two fire teams at opposite ends of the board, so dug in that by the time we've added up the modifiers, it's not even worth throwing the dice. And rather than waste time, we've just moved on to the next turn. But by changing our terrain and shaking things up a bit, then actually we could have allowed ourselves to have a more enjoyable game.
So we've broken it into 5 criteria. So firstly, the value for money. Second, the ease of building. Third, the gaming experience. Fourth, the storage aspect, how easy it is to store. And fifth, the longevity, which is looking at both the durability of it and also how long is this going to stay as your collection of terrain? How long are you going to get use for it?
So value for money, we scored a 4 out of 5. So first things first, let's look at how much money does it cost. So it's £104 for 4 sets of scenery. As I said earlier, it's £26.50 for each colonial settlement, and it's £25.50 for a scenery expansion pack. Realistically, you would want, if you were just going for these, you'd be looking at 2 of the colonial settlement packs, 1 scenery expansion pack, in that you're not likely to duplicate some of the buildings. So that's going to take you to about high 70s, £75, £76 £300, maybe a little bit more. That is, all things considering, not bad at all to cover a table in terrain. If you try and do that with MDF terrain, particularly from certain suppliers, you will find yourself running into £300, £400, £500, £600. Ben and I looked at a ready-made gaming table from a company we'd seen, and it was £560 all in. So anywhere between £70 and £105 is good value for money. You're getting, as we said, a variety of different buildings. It's not just exactly the same size over and over again. And those buildings, as I said, they're working at about £6.60 each or thereabouts. I don't think you can fault that for value for money. The reason it's not 5 out of 5 is that it's coming with buildings and some blocking terrain, a couple of bridges. It's not coming with scatter terrain. There's no barrels. There's no proper consoles. There are, as you can see in the video, there is a couple of consoles, but there's not the variation in the way that some other companies provide. So assuming that you didn't do as Ben and I did, and we will talk about this later, you would want to add some things to it, which is another reason why it's not a 5 out of 5. Anything that you need to add stuff to intrinsically cannot be phenomenal value for money.
So moving on to the build. Now we've given it a 3 out of 5. Now it is easy to build. It comes with the instructions and all the parts are clearly labelled. However, as we've talked about, some bits don't line up. You need to either cut bits that you shouldn't really need to, or you need to kind of force bits to get together. And if you do kind of put too much pressure on it, you can cause that fraying and it can be damaged quite easily. So it's average, but I wouldn't say it's anything above that.
Now for the gaming aspect, we've given it a 3 out of 5 as well. You won't have a negative gaming experience from this, and that's a very important point. Your gaming experience will be just fine, but it could be better. It could have better, different sized blocking terrain. It could have different footprints with more L-shaped buildings or chunks cut out of them, porches and doorways that troops can hide in to surprise attack out because of an Onawabin, or to claim cover when they're halfway along a building. Ben identified the alley situation earlier, which you see a lot. You've got a lot of roads and thin things, but if you're halfway down that, you have no cover unless you've placed some of these barriers down, and it gets samey. You'll play game upon game on it, but you need to add things. It needs a bit more to really give you a truly high quality gaming experience.
Now for storage, we've given it a 5 out of 5. It goes together really well. You flip the buildings upside down, you put the smaller buildings inside them, and then you put the scatter terrain inside all of that. It fits nicely into a kind of tough crate or similar branded crate, and it will store away nicely. You don't have to break it down. You will probably take off any ladders and things like that are attached to the buildings, but you don't have to take any of the buildings apart themselves. And if anything does pop apart when in storage, it's really easy to put back together, because it's generally going to be some of the hollow boards or that do maybe come a wee bit loose during storage. It's not going to get damaged particularly on itself because there's no sharp edges. It's all the same material. There's nothing that's going to cause any problems with its storage, and just make sure it's in a dry container and it should be fine for storing forever.
So the longevity, we have given a 3 out of 5. Now this is broken down into two parts. The physical longevity, it's durable, it's thick cardboard. It's 3mm thick, I believe. It'll take a hit. Obviously, don't try and hit it, don't scratch it, but if you place your seraph on top of it or your heavy infantry in the staircase, it's not going to buckle and collapse, and you can do that game in, game out, and it will not in any way impact on it. If you're running a gaming club, then it's durable enough that from game to game it should be fine, as long as you take care of it and your gamers aren't just knocking it over and throwing it around, and you store it, as Ben said, in your crates. It would do a gaming club fine, as long as it's well built, and if it gets damaged, somebody who knows what they're doing puts it back together. Now, the longevity we rated within this is only a 2, because it just doesn't have that much with it to keep games fresh, to keep games exciting. We know that when we lose games, it's never our fault. It's not our tactics, it's the dice, it's the board, our opponent cheated, our opponent cheesed us, whatever. If you're finding you're losing game in, game out on it, there's nothing you can do with it to spice the board up, to make it more interesting. Corvus Belli don't do a pack of scatter terrain for Kaldstrom that comes with ice crystal formations and a digger and the snowmobiles that it shows and the snowmobile things and hazardous waste bins. All of these they could produce and bring out with it. And that is a bit of a shame. So when we combine the durability of a 4 and longevity of a 2, that gives us an overall average of a 3 for the longevity, which gives us, in conclusion, we would rate this as being a 3.5 out of 5. It is a great way to get started. You will not have a negative gaming experience with it. You won't be sitting there downloading PDFs and squinting at folks' YouTube videos and sending emails to customer support departments. You will never really have the issue that some things have when they don't turn up with bits. It comes in vacuum sealed packs with all your cardboard sheets. You're going to know if something's missing very, very quickly. It doesn't have loose bits. It doesn't have components like neon signs that might have to be stuck on. Everything is on your cardboard sheets. You should never really have a mispack issue unless you get 2 of the same sheet and not one of the other one. I think there might be 2 very similar sheets, so just have a check. But it is a great place to start. However, how would you make it better? What would we do differently next time, Ben?
So I think the main thing we would do differently would be the ordering of it. So firstly, we ordered, as we've said earlier, 2 of the Colonial Settlement Pack and 2 of the Scenery Expansion Pack. And actually, the second Scenery Expansion Pack, we don't get as much use out of. The 2 towers, as we've said, give you quite a mirrored kind of gaming style, or quite an unfair gaming style sometimes, depending on how you're viewing it. So that can be a wee bit of a limitation. And the 2 ITS rooms, you're not likely to use. Yes, you can flip the floor from the objective room to become a ceiling to make a kind of 8x8 building. However, 2 large 8x8 buildings can be quite difficult to get onto your gaming board. And because it's not got stairs of that built into it, then you're using the other stairs and that to then go onto it. It becomes quite a kind of platform more than anything. So its uses, the second kind of objective room, are quite limited. Objective rooms themselves, you don't need for every game, and you're not going to use in every game. So realistically, it's almost a kind of spare building that in each of the sets. So we would only order 1 of the Scenery Expansion Pack, and I think we wouldn't feel that we had lost out really on anything that we've got so far. What we would do is then use that kind of £25 or however much extra in your budget you may have. We would pick up scatter terrain from other companies, likes of Micro Art Studios, which are quite popular in Europe. There's other ones in the US and the like. And we would get stuff that would then add dressing to the board. Try and find stuff that's going to tell that bit of a story. So be it kind of more construction vehicles if you're looking to go down more of the kind of mine core base, or if you're wanting it to be more the shopping aspect with icicles, shopping malls and that, then maybe some city cars, some bins to go outside some of the buildings. Planters are another thing. So you'll see people using the aquarium plants in these planter boxes for MDF, which are generally very cheap. They add just that bit of spark and colour to the board that unfortunately is a wee bit lacking from these sets. That's the way I would go, certainly, just to add some flavour to the board. It wouldn't cost the earth just to add a couple of these packs, and I think it would give a more enjoyable gaming experience. We had also looked at triads, is often what they're called, or advertisement boards, something that just takes that flavour of infinity that you see on these sets, offers a slightly different shaped piece of blocking terrain, but also ties in with that story, that feeling that you want to portray with your battles. The other thing I would look for would be some of the fluorescent acrylic pieces that various companies do that just add that wee bit more colour to it, much like the planters, just to brighten up your board, particularly as we'd mentioned that a lot of these kind of coloration on the buildings is quite dark, so something just to add that wee bit of brightness to the board I think would really offset some of these. And I feel with the cost of one of the expansion packs, you would be able to pick up a couple of those small scatter terrain packs that would just add that bit more to your board. So that's our review of the Kaldstrom Colonial Settlement Pack and the Scenery Expansion Pack. We do feel that this is similar to the other Corvus Belli terrain packs, which are in this cardboard style. So from Crimson Stone and also Wildfire. What we're going to move on to do is to look at some of our other terrain that we've picked up to try and kind of add to this or to replace it, and we'll talk through the pros and cons of that as well. So please feel free to comment any suggestions that you may have. What are your thoughts on this terrain? Any questions that you may have, be happy to answer in the comments below, and please feel free to like and subscribe.
Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy gaming.